I'll put my camera on so you can see I'm a real live person. Good morning, everybody. My name is Chantal Wauters. I'm marketing for EMEA. And I am joined today by my colleague, Ruben Wildeboer. Ruben, you can put your camera on and show yourself if you wish.
Yeah, hello everyone, good morning.
Good morning. I see people still are coming in, Ruben, so I'll take it slightly slow there. So welcome to this demonstration. It's going to be a very short and practical technical demonstration that Ruben will be giving you. Ruben, by the way, solution architect for the EMEA region, and he will show you how to shift left API security testing with our tool. So he'll run through different scenarios, and you can ask your questions as we go in the questions box. I will get back to that here. So as you've noticed, and many of you have already used the GoToWebinar user panel, I am the moderator, and I will be checking the questions that come in. You are automatically muted, and there is time for a Q&A at the end. So please feel free to ask your questions in the questions box. If you have any audio problems or anything like that via the chat, what sometimes happens is that the GoToWebinar user gets a little bit stuck, and then just by refreshing the screen, you will be hearing the audio good again. So today what you'll be seeing is how to generate functional API tests, the reuse of API tests to supercharge API security tests, how to integrate API security testing within CI/CD. And again, Ruben will be taking you through these steps as good as he can. So Ruben, I think the next slide is going to be summarizing what you're going to be showing. So it would be great if you could run through that slide, please, for the audience.
Yeah, before we get started, first, one slide to basically describe the context a little bit and introduce you to Parasoft software. So what we are going to do today is first we will create an API test in the Parasoft SOAtest for API testing. There are different ways of building an API test. We can do that manually through the interface of SOAtest, but I will use the Smart API Generator instead. And this component is actually a plugin for Google Chrome. So what will happen is that we will start with Google Chrome. I have a small demo application. It's called ParaBank. It has a couple of operations, so people can log in, do like transfer of money in their accounts, and actions like they can request a loan, for example. And basically what will happen is that the Smart API Generator, it will record the traffic from the front end to the back end system. And using that traffic, it will basically filter out all the API traffic. And from that traffic in SOAtest, an API test will be created. Well, I will introduce you a little bit to SOAtest to show you how what the result of this recording is, and how you can maybe enhance the test a little bit, and how this could be like a starting point to create like a data-driven test. But from there, I will introduce you to the concept of reusing that test. So first we can reuse, for example, the test for load and performance testing, but we can also reuse the test for security testing. And that's what we will show, what I will show you today. And we have in the left corner there, or in the left side of the screen, our SOAtest, our test scenario. We will then execute the test through OWASP ZAP. So the ZAP engine is basically embedded within SOAtest. And it will reuse the API test which we have. It will only take all the requests and also execute them through the ZAP engine. And the result will be that we get a report out of that. You can see an example of a snapshot of that report in the right side. In this case, CWE standard is the matrix is displayed here. Chantal, I think if you click on the next step. And what we then can do is that we can take that report, and you can then share that report either through Parasoft software, the development testing platform can be used there, or you can share that report to your security team, or with to your development team, so that you can basically improve basically resolve the problems which you have. Well, this whole system, I will also show you that today, like in the desktop application itself. But there is also the option that you integrate it in the pipeline. And if you do that, then you can actually make a real shift left with this API testing, security testing activity. Often security testing is usually done like in the last stage, often before you go to production. But however, it's better to find the bugs earlier, of course. So with using this mechanism, it is quite easy to make a shift left with security testing as well. So this is what we are. What I will show you today. We have around 15 minutes, so I will let's get started without further ado, because this is also consuming time. So what I will do is I will actually disable the webcam. I'm still here, but
yes, and don't forget to make yourself presenter, Ruben.
I will.
And again, questions can be asked during the presentation in the questions box, and at the end of the demonstration, Ruben will be able to address those questions. So feel free to type them in.
So you should be able to see my screen now. Maybe Chantal, you can confirm if that's the...
Confirmed, yes.
Okay, so perfect. So what we see here is, let's see. So what we see here is the example application called ParaBank, and it's basically just a web application which we can use to request some account information. And this web application is actually relying on a REST API, a backend system. And what we will do is we will basically generate an API test for that underlying API traffic. So for that, the Parasoft Recorder can be used. So we will enable the API traffic recording. And what will happen is that the traffic is recorded and is then sent to Parasoft SOAtest. Here we see the desktop interface of Parasoft SOAtest. So on the left side, we can find our test scenarios modeled out in TST files. So I will show you the result of the recording in a minute. And afterwards, we can basically, from this interface, we can then push the results or the test scenarios to version control systems like Git. So back to the browser. There we go. Let's start the recording. Now, what we see in the right top corner, that the red dot is blinking, indicating that all the traffic is being recorded right now. So I will now interact with the application a little bit. So the application has some functionality to look at account details, maybe to transfer some money around. So we will also make use of that functionality. Requesting a loan. So basically, I am trying to use the application now as a user, just to trigger traffic to the backend system. And now I'm basically done with the scenario that I wanted to test. So I go back to the Parasoft Recorder and I click on the Stop Recording button. So now the test asset is created. We see a small pop-up that all the test is now created within Parasoft SOAtest. So I switch now to the Parasoft SOAtest interface, and we can find our new test scenario, the TST file here in the workspace. So if I expand this a little bit, then you can see that the traffic which is recorded in this session, it consists of 7 steps. First, the login page, and then some interaction with several endpoints of the application. The fun thing of this recording is that this scenario is already a working scenario. So I can just hit the scenario, hit the play button, and the API test will be executed right away. For example, let me show you the account details which we have over here. Here we see a request to a particular endpoint, requesting all the account information for a particular customer, and we can find the response over here with all the data. Well, the fun thing is that this is not only like a recording of the actions, like put in the right order, but it's actually also linking those requests. So, for example, we see that here at this location, a databank is being used. So within this databank, data is actually saved from the response that we received for this particular test, and that data is then used later on in our test scenario. So, for example, if I click on test number 3, I can find that data from test number 2 is being used. So that means that with this setup, with this mechanism, I can also make this test data-driven. In this case, you will see that at the first step, I'm logging in with a user called John, but I will be able now to add data sources to my tests. I make the test data-driven, maybe data from an external database, and for example, I can then feed information like usernames, password, maybe like expected data. And I don't have to reconfigure my whole test for that, because all the test is basically already like linked together, all the steps. So you basically get like a big head start using the Parasoft Recorder in building the API test. Now, SOAtest not only has capabilities of testing APIs, it also has capabilities of testing UIs. So, for example, I already prepared this a little bit. So I created an UI test also based on ParaBank. So if I execute this test, then we will see that we have in parallel also an UI test. So for UI testing, we can do like more the testing of the positive flows, and the API test can be used to do more like in-depth testing. All the scenarios we have, maybe also like more like negative scenarios, edge cases, things like that. And both scenarios we can actually now reuse for security testing. And I will show you how that is being done. So we have our existing test here, our TST file. And basically what I can do is that I can say, well, for all the steps that we have here in this particular TST file, let's chain our penetration testing tool to these steps. And it will basically then look at the traffic which is used within those clients, and it will redirect that traffic to the sub engine, which is embedded within Parasoft SOAtest. So let's click finish here. I can also show you this here. For every client, we now have the penetration testing tool attached. So if I now re-execute the test, you will actually see that this will take much longer because we're not sending one request anymore, but for every test, the test itself is being executed. So that data will appear in the traffic viewer over here. A request, here we see our username and password, and here we have our request or our response, sorry. So in this case, it consists of header information. But this is not only what we have here. We also can take a look at the traffic viewer for the security test. And here we can see all the traffic which is initiated from the OWASP engine. So if I browse here to all the ad tags, well, maybe we can look at one. For example, SQL injection. Let's look at the SQL injection, for example. then we can see that basically the Zap engine is speaking around with all the requests that we have. In this case, my username John was replaced with a special character, and basically we can see like all the attacks that were done from our Zap directly here in SOAtest in the traffic viewer. So all these attacks and all these iterations, they are all applied on all of the existing tests that we created for our API tests. And all the data, all the results also of the security test are fed back to SOAtest. So for example, if I go to the account or to the transactions, so let me show you a couple of examples here. This might be a nice example to show right now, because this is like one of the attacks that I showed you in the traffic viewer, and here the engine actually determined that the application is vulnerable for this specific attack. So we see like all the details, the attack what was being done, but also examples, the description of why this is insecure, and tips to resolve this particular problem. Now the next step would be to then generate a report for this. So let's hit on the report. Let's hit the report button, and let's generate a report. So there we go. This is the report of our API test, which we just executed. But if I browse or scroll a little bit down, then we can also find a report about API security issues. In this case, we are looking at CWE, where all the findings are basically categorized in the different types of problems that were founded in this particular test. So if I scroll down a little bit, for example, to the first one here about an potential integral overflow, then we can see the URL, all the information and why this is like a problem, but also the traffic is attached. So if you want to replay this, maybe outside of API testing tooling, you can just click on the traffic to see more details on this specific finding.
Ruben, one of the questions that came in the chat or in the Q&A was whether this can be exported also, like the report to send out.
Yeah, well, in this case, you see that the report is based on HTML. We can also generate this report based on PDF. However, for reporting, what we usually see is that people would like then to integrate this within the pipeline. Mm-hmm. So I have that pipeline example also available. Let me see if let me show you this example of Azure DevOps, for example, where I executed this particular security test through Azure DevOps. Basically, what happens here, and then I will try to address the question around the report better, is that the SOAtest command line interface is being used to execute this test. Well, this is quite a simple example where I just run a complete project, my ParaBank project, to execute all the tests that are within that particular project. And a report is then generated as a result of this particular execution. Well, the nice thing about having this within the pipeline or executing this from pipeline systems is that we have the report, the HTML report, the PDF available within Azure DevOps, but also the data, the findings are also fed back into the pipeline itself. So here we can find, for example, one particular finding where we had like an error. No, in this case, it's the risk is low, but still, this is one particular error. And here you see that the same data is feeded back into the platform of Azure DevOps. So this not only helps for reporting, it will also help to give you an overview about trends. Is the situation getting better or getting worse over time? And it will basically publish the reports within Azure DevOps. I hope this answers your question.
Yep, I think you answered it fully. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, one thing to add here is that currently we are looking at the CWE standard. The report is generated for the CWE standard. However, we can also actually execute the same test, and then I have to go to the report department for API security for the OWASP 2021 top 10. So basically, all the findings are then mapped on data from OWASP. So depending on the standard that you want to comply to, you can either generate reports for CWE or against OWASP standards. So this was the demo that I prepared for now about testing API security. Yeah, if you have any further questions, please feel free to put them in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruben. I put my camera on. Let me start presenting back my screen. There we go. Show this window, yes. There we go. So Ruben ran through this API, shifting left API security testing. There was one question in between that you answered, Ruben. The other one was about you're showing it off in Azure platform right now, Azure DevOps. What else do you support there?
Yeah, so we have support for all the popular pipeline systems like Azure DevOps, Jenkins, for example. But basically what happens is that all the reports can be easily converted to JUnit as well. So we can basically integrate with almost every pipeline system or every CI/CD system that exists.
Okay, thank you. And then another question just came in. How about upgrades of the embedded security checker, OWASP ZAP, I presume?
Maybe it's possible to elaborate a little bit on that question about updates.
Upgrades. So how about upgrades of the security checker?
Well, the software itself, the security checker, is being upgraded by Parasoft, of course, because it's like an embedded component of the solution. So Parasoft software will Parasoft will basically release new versions of SOAtest twice a year, and then the OWASP sub-engine is also updated. Yeah, people can choose, users can use to also choose to upgrade the embedded OWASP sub-engine themselves, of course. So you have like full control also about the configuration of the OWASP sub-engine. However, we are distributing the product with the pre-configured installation. So you can use like the pre-configuration if you just want to get started quickly.
Okay. Let me see whether any other questions came in. No, these were the questions that we had so far, so I hope this was clear to everybody. Again, a short demonstration. You can have it personalized. If you want to connect with us directly, Ruben Wildeboer was the person showing this off. You can find him also on LinkedIn. If you want more information on Parasoft or our products, just go to our website and you can request a demo on any of our products or via the info@parasoft.com. In our YouTube channel, you'll see a lot of videos too supporting where we can help you. And one last promotional, which I personally really am looking forward to, is on the 3rd of November, we have our summit, our Automated Software Testing Quality Summit, in which we have some very nice speakers attending. So I'd like to invite you to attend if you wish. If you can't, if the time slot doesn't suit you, it starts at 4 p.m. Central European Time. By registering, you'll be receiving the recording, and then you can view the sessions that you want to on your own and when it does suit you. So for now, Ruben, I thank you very much. I know you are in the UK currently, so you have to travel back to the Netherlands. So I wish you a safe flight. And I would like to thank everybody for their time and questions. And again, feel free to reach out to us. I wish you all a very good day. I'll be closing the session now. Thank you.
Bye-bye.